everybody. Good morning. Almost to be afternoon. I just wanted to come up here and to welcome everyone to the East Tennessee History Center and talk a little bit about what we're doing. I'd like to thank you all for coming out to listen to this. This is going to be a very fascinating talk. But before we get into that, let me just tell you about some of the upcoming programs. We have on April 27th, so that's tomorrow, in the evening, which is unusual, at 6, we will have a talk called Title IX, Pat Summitt and Tennessee Trailblazers about women's basketball. And Joan Cronin will be there along with Ann Furrow and Missy Kane. So it's going to be a really, really amazing talk. It's going to be held by Mary Allen Pathel, and it's going to be excellent. So I'd like to encourage everyone to come to that. Also, the next sort of talk concerning our exhibit, and if you've not been to our exhibit in the back, which is Lights Camera East Tennessee, this is one of the talks and is a part of the program there that has been done in partnership with the Society as well as McClung and Tamas. And our next talk for that will be at noon on May 17th, and it's Hollywood Comes to East Tennessee, which is put on again by Tamas and the McClung Collection, as well as the East Tennessee Historical Society, in conjunction and to celebrate our exhibition, Lights Camera East Tennessee. So to come talk to us today about our talk will be Eric Dawson, who is the director of the McClung Historical Collection. So without further ado, I will turn over to him. Thank you, Eric.
Well, thank you so much, Warren, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to start out by asking, who here has heard of Sam Orleans? Oh, several of you. Did anybody happen to know him or any of his family members? Okay, there's a few people here, so that's really interesting. He was quite a figure around Knoxville, known outside of Knoxville as well. But the reason we're talking about him and celebrating him is because he was a local filmmaker, cameraman, producer, and he also opened Knoxville's first production studio. It was right down on Cumberland where the Cook Loft is today. And he didn't make traditional narrative films in the way that most of us think of movies. He made a lot of industrial films and educational films. And what's interesting about those is that they provide this record of the people and the region that aren't often represented in other types of films. We like to talk about how industrial films, educational, and of course news films, which he also shot, there's been more footage of that shot than Hollywood films. Most people think of movies as feature filmed Hollywood films, but the record that's preserved on film is in fact better preserved in these sort of smaller regional productions around. And so when we look at his films, what we see are people and places of East Tennessee, a lot that would have been known at the time when they were made. And I just want to start off by saying somebody's already asked me if this is in Knoxville. No, it isn't. He did have a career before he came here, and so this is kind of, I think that's Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so as I said, he wasn't from here. He was actually born in 1899 in Helena, Montana. Before he was 1 year old, the family moved out to the West Coast, and then they caught a ship to head to New York. And this would have been pre-Panama Canal days, so of course they had to take the long way around the Cape Horn of Africa. I doubt he remembered that, but it is sort of a telling thing of what would become a feature of his life. He liked to travel. He made films in different parts of the world and certainly across the country. This is a picture of him and his father there. And this, he wrote a 3-page biography, sort of detailing parts of his life. And I think it's really interesting because of, it shows his flair for the dramatic. There's very little punctuation in this. I'll try to read this excerpt I've selected without the punctuation so you can see how it reads. But he got interested in the motion picture business at a very early age. He was 14 years old when he first went to a theater, Broadway theater in Albany, New York. And this is what he wrote about it in this account called A Boy in the Picture Business. As he got inside the door, a man was coming down from the booth with an offer to see the show if he would rewind reels during the supper hour, and what a place that coupe was. One powers 5 projectors, Mounted on boards with pipe stands for legs, the arc lamp was sputtering and sizzling away with the sweetest sound the kid ever heard. Before or since, along the side of the machine was the rewind bench and a stool so the operator could crank the projector with one hand and rewind. And did the kid have fun with that day when he became a moving picture guy? So enamored, as a teenager onward, and he started working in that theater, and then he left home a little bit to learn some more trades. This account also talks about how he learned to make a pinhole camera out of Popular Mechanics magazine. So he was already sort of a self-mythologizing or very sort of big personality at an early age. When he left home, he worked on various ocean crew vessels, and he also took a marine engineering course at Tulane University. And this is interesting because it will influence his future career. And we also think it's kind of interesting, his background was in engineering, much like Knoxville's probably most well-known director, Clarence Brown. So that kind of links them. So he finally did start getting work in the motion picture business. He worked in movie studios in New Jersey, Brooklyn, Long Island, and then had a series of jobs as a newsreel cameraman. So we can see here, this is Fox Movie Tone News. And he worked for MGM. There's the photo where he is up on the skyscraper there. And he worked for MGM for a while. And then he went back to Albany for a bit and worked for the Hearst News Service, and he filmed all kinds of things around the naval aircraft films. Army First Mass Air Maneuvers. First air cruise to the West Indies was for Pan Am Airways. So he was making these films, he was shooting newsreels, and in 1930 he started his own production company in New York City. And he was making industrial films up there for companies like Eastman Teaching Films and General Business Films. This was around the time that films were transitioning from silent films to the talkies, and it was kind of a rough time for everybody, and everybody had to learn their trade as they went. And he referred to them as those weeping and happy days. But he was sort of an autodidact and sort of taught himself to do these things, and he rolled with the punches and sort of kept his foot in the game. Until in 1934, he got offered a job as a cameraman for the Tennessee Valley Authority. And he came down to East Tennessee. It wasn't long before he was the head cameraman for that department. He actually worked there until 1942, and then once the war came, he sort of had to transition into making films sort of to support the war effort. A photographer on films like Train Busters, Target Berlin, and a film some of you might have heard of, The Beginning or the End, the story of the atomic bomb in Oak Ridge, which was made, of course, to talk about that development later on. Then after the war, just looking for something to do, how he could keep his hand in it, he started the Sam Orleans Film Production. And that picture is a little bit later than when it was formed in 1946. But as I said, it was down by the Cook Loft on Cumberland Avenue. And this is where he decided to start making his films and serving the region. A lot of local businesses, a lot of municipal films were made. And the motto was, we'll go everywhere, film anything. And he had clients such as DuPont, General Electric, U.S. Rubber, Atomic Energy Commission, and the U.S. Air Force. And he also he had a lab in New York City in Pathé Studios, so he would travel back and forth there. And again, this is a little later than 1946, but it gives you, you can see some facts about the studio where he talks about what the facilities are like. He talks about the Pathé News. And just in general, is trying to sell himself. He would give this to clients. The first film that he made, it was actually in 1945. It was called Your Health Department in Action. And it was sort of known, the most famous person involved with that was Jerry Collins, who some of you might have heard of. He was a renowned keyboardist and piano player. He's playing the organ to do the soundtrack in this. They made prints in 35 millimeter to be shown in theaters, and then they also made the smaller 16 millimeter to be shipped around the country. And there were around 50 of those shipped out. So right away with his first film produced in Knoxville, they were getting demand for it outside of the city. And these are going to be the types of films that are shown in your education courses. And he made 3 films in 1946 alone that are pretty interesting. And sort of what we're doing, in addition to talking about his life and his works, we'll be showing clips from these films. And one thing I want to go ahead and point out here at the top, because I think we have about 4, they're going to all vary in quality, and this is for a few reasons. And I don't mean quality in how they were produced, I mean quality in how they look now. That's due to the condition that the films and the prints were in after they survived 60, 70 years later. And it's also due to how these films were transferred. Some of the ones we're going to look at were transferred almost 20 years ago, and the sort of top of the line treatment they could get then, those standards are not, accessible anymore or not desirable anymore. We do high definition film scanning now. And I only point this out to say, like, so much of the film archiving work that's been done in the last 10, 20 years, it could stand some, new transfers and new preservation. And we're always looking to do that at the Tennessee Archive Moving Image and Sound, which is the AV wing of the McClung collection. Well, the first clip we're going to watch is from Operation Textbook, made in 1946. And this was a film he made for UT, sort of to talk about the GI Bill. And it was served as a useful promotional tool at the time, but now with historic hindsight, it's kind of interesting because we're getting these glimpses of the campus and certain faculty member and professors there that we don't have sort of in any other record. And this is like a 3-minute excerpt from I believe this film is a bit longer, but.
The University of Tennessee is making headlines. University's budget inadequate. Faculty members leave UT. Enrollment limited to Tennesseans and veterans. As fall leaves drifted down on the statewide UT campus, designed for only 4,500 students, the GI Bill of Rights took effect. Operation Textbook was on. It was on in Knoxville. It was on in Memphis. It was on in Martin. 9,000 of the 3-year backlog of young Tennessee swarmed to your state university, hopeful of a new grip on life. 5,000 GIs, many of them married. They found no housing, not enough teachers, not enough classrooms, not enough textbooks, and a university with only half enough money. We all read of UT's dilemma. Few know what was done about it. Whole villages were rolled in, barracks erected, night classes were scheduled. Some 200 new instructors recruited. Faculty offices became classroom space. Inadequate temporary stopgaps, of course. Could you cram for an exam on a stairway? Something better is needed for an institution where only the football is self-supporting. The problem demands other answers. Veteran students in agriculture study the latest in farm equipment. UT, whose faculty helped on the A-bomb research, can train these youngsters well for a post-war world. At the same time, it still carries forward the research and extension services that help make Tennessee a great state. Here is Dr. Hertel and the fibrograph he invented for precise measurement of cotton fiber length, a boon to the textile industry. Director Baskerville conducts research for manufacturers interested in producing better household heating equipment. Dr. Nielsen analyzes a chemical substance on UT's infrared spectrograph. The chart on this instrument identifies a molecule as accurately as a fingerprint identifies a person. And here's a real rarity, rhenium. UT chemists Melvin and Bacon discovered the only known source in America. And UT is the only known producer of this rare metal so useful in industrial research. Yes, UT looks forward to the world of tomorrow while training the youth of today. Operation Textbook is only a passing phase in a great institution's perpetual mission, Operation Humanity.
Okay, so I guess something else to point out. The football thing got quite a laugh, so some things don't change too when we watch these archival films.
Question. Who wrote these? Did he write these?
He wrote some of them. It varies. That's something else I'll be pointing out, is that there's a lot of different people involved. He was primarily a producer and a cameraman, but he employed a lot of people, some interesting people that would go on to make more films and work in the television and film industries.
And that leads to the next question. Who has that voice that I seem to hear in every newsreel I've ever seen?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It is kind of a standard voice. I don't know that, I'm guessing that person was employed here in Knoxville, and you just kind of try to hit the notes that is sort of like a standard. And you'll hear that in this next film, also produced in 1946. This is a really interesting one. Again, we're going to be watching just like a 4-minute excerpt from a longer 25-minute film. It's called Today's News, Tomorrow's Men. And it's ostensibly about news carriers and how young men can sort of make careers for themselves and already get involved in gainful employment and being productive members of society. But it's also interesting because it takes you through the Knoxville News Sentinel, which of course the building would have been very close to Sam Orlean's studio at the time. So they would just walk down the street, I guess, and film within it. Again, it's a much longer film, but this will give you an idea of both the tone of how they were talking to the young men it was aimed for, but also a behind-the-scenes look of how a newspaper would be operating then.
This is Tommy Miller. Tommy is just about your own age. He does well in school. And he's got the most educated toe in sandlot football. One day, Tommy was startled to see his best friend, Frank Jones, riding all over town on a brand new bicycle. It was one of those extra special models with lots of shiny chromium finish. And the way it ran. Well, as soon as Tommy saw it, he knew he couldn't rest until he had one just like it. Frank told him that he'd been able to get the bicycle with the money that he'd saved from his new Sentinel carrier route. A carrier route? Well, Tommy had never thought very much about the idea, but it might be worth looking into. Tommy's folks talked it over with the Joneses and discovered that they were thrilled with the way that Frank was becoming a real businessman. Mr. Jones said that the training Frank was receiving was worth even more than the money he was making. A newspaper is really a huge plant which manufactures an entirely new and different product every day. In these offices, the business manager and other executives arrange the details of this huge enterprise that brings together so many skills. Upon them rests the responsibility of fulfilling obligations to News Sentinel subscribers, the advertisers, the employees who make it, and the owners who have invested their capital. Most manufacturing plants turn out the same product every day. But every day's News Sentinel must be created anew, a brand new product every 24 hours. Thousands of miles from Knoxville, where the presses are, experienced foreign correspondents send the latest international news to America by the almost instantaneous teletype. At the branch office in the great cities of the United States, the news is sorted and sent to hundreds of newspaper offices throughout the country. From these branch offices, too, come items of national importance, lead stories from Washington, New York, San Francisco. This is one of the teletype machines in the News Sentinel office. Hour by hour, day after day, it unceasingly sends in the flood of the news. But how about pictures for the paper? The News Sentinel's own photographers cover assignments from the city editor, as do the reporters. The News Sentinel has the first pictures. It is served by Acme Telephoto. This is a transceiver. When a picture is ready to come over the wire, the telephone rings. The operator sets the dials so they synchronize with the dials at the other end of the connection. A picture can be telephotoed in 7 minutes from any place in the continental United States. The telegraph editor keeps vigilant watch on these machines to catch the developments as they occur. The editorial room is the heart of the newspaper. It is here that the news comes from the 5-wire services and where local stories are prepared for the paper. Here sits the editor who determines the editorial policy of the News Sentinel. The associate editor helps formulate policies and shares editorial responsibility. The managing editor is the news executive. He is the one who is responsible for the general appearance and news content of the newspaper. He passes on all stories that appear in the paper and determines the location and the space devoted to each story, depending on the importance of the news. Special feature writers, cartoonists, artists work under the supervision of the managing editor. The state editor receives news reports from hundreds of local correspondents located in towns throughout the News Sentinel circulation territory. The city editor is responsible for all local news. He assigns reporters to cover the various beats such as the City Hall, the Federal Building, the courthouse, the hospitals, and the police station. And the results? Would you like some new baseball equipment? A tennis racket? A snappy sport jacket? A football uniform? Or a well-filled bank account which grows every week? Carriers have the means of getting all these. More important, carriers have the respect of their communities. Neighbors tell each other about the good service they get. Businessmen comment on the professional way in which carriers run their routes. Over the back fence, in the grocery line, on the porch, all over town. People talk about the courteous and efficient carrier. And carriers are proud of their job, for they know that a great newspaper depends on them to get the news to the reading public. Only in a free country like America do people get real newspapers. Only in a nation like this can a boy operate such a successful business. A business that provides regular year-round income, that fits in well with his school and actually aids schoolwork because it develops a boy mentally and physically. Regular outdoor activity is healthful. Business training advances him far beyond his years. You learn how to meet and do business with many people, building a reputation among them and with your newspaper that will provide a valuable stone for your future.
So when we watch these films, again, 1946, keep in mind that television wasn't around yet. So people would be seeing films like this in the Tennessee Theater or other downtown theaters. They'd be sitting there and seeing people they knew, or maybe names from the newspaper they would recognize, some of their neighbors. Even the Farragut Hotel, which if they were in the Tennessee Theater, it would be like, oh, that's right outside there. So it was quite an interesting and novel thing for local audiences to be seeing themselves like that. If you got all your questions to the end, I got to get through. Thank you. Now, I'm wondering if anybody recognizes either of these individuals. There's another shot. There we have Sam Orleans behind the camera there. And that's Governor Jim McCord talking to a 12-year-old Cormac McCarthy, or as he was known then, Charles McCarthy. Charles, or Charlie McCarthy, you can see why he changed his name probably, if anybody remembers the ventriloquist act from the 50s. His father, Cormac, Charles's father, was a legal counsel for TVA, and Sam Orleans, of course, worked for TVA, so they surely must have known each other and encountered each other that way. But Charles also had a flair for the dramatic already. I don't think he was just recruited for this film, because about a year before, he tried out for the role of the young boy lead in Clarence Brown's production of The Yearling. He was actually shortlisted. The producers had a lot of good things to say about him, said he was a good sport and a good talent. But of course, that role ultimately went to Claude Jarman Jr. out of Nashville. And this appeared in the Tennessee Extension Review later, sort of reporting on that shooting. This is just kind of a side note in addition to the flair for dramatic. Like I said, he tried out for the Yearling. He was in this, and we're going to watch a little clip from it. But I noticed in the newspaper article researching this, just a few months after this, there's a story where he was admitted to St. Mary's Hospital where he had shot himself in the leg with a .22 rifle he and a friend were playing with. It said it was like flesh wounds in both legs. I'd never heard that before. It was reported in the Sentinel. So if anybody knows him or how to get in touch with him, ask him about all of this, really. So the movie he was in, it was called Dairying in Tennessee. And that's the thing about these industrial films is they really don't, well, they tell you what they're about in their title. It's not the most imaginative title. So it's a look at the dairy industry throughout Tennessee. And this will give me another opportunity to comment on the transfer of this film. You're going to notice it's blown out. It's not in the best condition. So we're hoping that at some point soon, I don't know, maybe some grant funds or donations or something, we can get some of these films new transfers. But please enjoy what I believe is the debut performance of Cormac McCarthy in Dairying in Tennessee.
In the history of the state of Tennessee, there are periods of romance and adventure. There are times of sober thinking and serious planning. And there are seasons of gloom and even of tragedy. In the historic record of Tennessee's progress, we find that education, health, religion, agriculture, commerce, transportation, and industry are the real agencies through which a great commonwealth has been builded. This is the story of a contribution agriculture has made to that historic record. It is the story of events in the lives of our pioneer and modern dairymen that is making Tennessee one of the great dairy states of our nation. It is the biography of Tennessee's dairy cow.
Boy, that's good.
You bet it's good, Jimmy. It's good because men like Mr. Allen Campbell and Mr. George Campbell here have helped to make it good. It's rich food, Jimmy, thanks to the cow. And thanks to science and modern dairy methods, it's safe food for young fellows like you. But by the way, what are you doing here on Cleburne Farm?
Oh, just learning all about cows, Uncle Bob.
Well, this is a pretty good place to come for that, Jimmy. Cleburne Farm has been breeding Jersey cattle continuously for over 65 years. Captain M.C. Campbell started the herd back in 1878. Then Mr. George Campbell here followed his father on the farm. And now George Jr. is following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. Uncle Allen Campbell bought his first Jersey in 1879 and has bred them ever since. Let us see that picture of Grandfather Captain Campbell, Jimmy. He was a fine man and a pioneer in the dairy industry in Tennessee. Along with the other early breeders of Jersey cattle, he's made a lasting contribution to the dairy development of our state. Wait a minute, Jimmy. You can't go in there.
I have a present for the governor, Uncle Bob. Governor McClung, I have a present for you and Commissioner Van Cleve. It's a documentary film on the dairy industry in Tennessee. Uncle Bob and I have been making it, and it is for all the people in the state.
Thank you, Jimmy. Commissioner Van Cleve and I are very happy, sir, to have a fine chap like you make us a present. And many boys of your age have contributed much to dairying in Tennessee. To unfold the story of dairying in Tennessee would be to present the most brilliant page in her progressive history. From a small beginning in this state, even in 1925, the produce from dairying in the state was only $5 million. 20 years later, in 1945, we reached the magnificent sum of $87 million, and we are still on the march.
So it got kind of meta there at the end. They presented the governor with the film. They were in. I don't know how that happened. But yeah, clearly that was like the first few minutes and the final few minutes of a film that was more like 20, I think, in length. And in between, you have a documentary production exploring dairying in Tennessee. I want to take a minute to just talk about Sam Orlean's personal life a little bit. In 1938, he married Jane Hennigan. She was a former Mayo Clinic X-ray technician who moved to Knoxville to work for Dr. Herbert Acuff's clinic. And he was living on a houseboat for a while. And then, once he married Jane, they moved into this house over on Ford Place. You all know Ford Place over off of Sevier Avenue? Well, it used to be much longer. I believe it was 1981 with the construction of different roads, interstate and such. That area was taken out, but this was quite a bucolic area over there. I've talked to several people who lived in that neighborhood, and everybody's got such great stories and fond memories of Ford Place, and specifically the Orleans family. He was quite a character around town, and Bert Vincent would write about him in his articles, and he was well known and well beloved, especially by neighborhood kids who could show films. They did. Sam and Jane had a daughter, Alice, who has been extremely helpful, Alice Orleans Jordan now, extremely helpful in getting these materials to Tamas, to McClung, years ago when they first came in, and even recently being in contact with her again. She keeps providing information. She's donated artifacts, which you can see in the exhibit, or over here if you care to look after the program. So yeah, it was a really engaged family. They were popular, they were liked, and everybody has just such kind words to say about them. I like this he made a few season's greetings card, and this one included Alice when she was 17 months old. And he would show films for neighborhood children in different classrooms. Okay. But yeah, overall, it's just something we wanted to add is just how everybody speaks so well of him, and Burt Vincent's articles also sort of speak of him as a local character. Obviously, he had his studio on Gay Street, so he'd have been known up and down downtown Knoxville. As we were seeing in the Darien, Tennessee, you saw that Billy Barnes was at the organ. People would have known him at the time. Nate Way was an interesting person around town. He worked with a lot of different persons. To your questions earlier about who was narrator, it was a lot of people who had shot films with TVA or Oak Ridge and then would go on to continue in the business. And Nate Way was the Uncle Bob narrator, and he's an interesting figure. Looking into him, he produced civic operas. He plays at UT's Carousel Theater, WNX radio dramas, Gatlinburg's outdoor production of Chucky Jack. He was writer, director, and narrator for many Orleans productions, and he worked for TVA's Division of Design for many years. And I put these up just so you could see. This illustrates, we're not going to be able to, of course, see everything, all types of films Sam Orleans produced, but he did everything. There's actually surgery films. Local physicians would hire him to film surgeries so they could study them or teach other students. We've seen him filming cows, but he did do quite a few rural review films. Here's a couple of photos of one in the studio and one sort of a mobile unit on production. You could see the Knoxville skyline in the background there in this one on the right. And then he was a great promoter. As I said, he was a showman, even though he did these sort of what I think some people might think of as dry classroom educational films. Well, they have the potential to be dry, but there's always a sense of humor or an angle to them that's pretty entertaining and engaging. And he carried this over into his selling of those things and different showcases he would have. And another shot of the mobile unit. And it's also interesting to note that aside from these industrial films, he also shot things like the Christmas Parade. The Chamber of Commerce hired him to shoot the 1951 Christmas Parade. This would not have been something, obviously, that would be distributed outside of Knoxville. There's no narration. It's silent. He set 2 cameras up on Gay Street and shot it, and it was shown in local downtown theaters to local audiences. And this happened a few times. He wasn't the only person to do this. There were other filmmakers who did that. But again, this is in the age before television or when not many people owned television. So they would, this would be a way for communities to see themselves. He also filmed a program called Tell It to the Camera, which was sort of like a candid camera type of thing. Alan Funt came to town, and Sam set up on Market Square Mall in 1963 and filmed people sort of making confessions in this van. That sounded weird, but it was more like, it was a humorous kind of thing. And here he is filming on the set of 1951's Swamp Girl down in the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. To supplement his income, he would take work as a cameraman on different productions. He went to the Okefenokee Swamp for that one, obviously. But he did shoot some Knoxville ones, All the Way Home, the adaptation of James Agee's Death in the Family novel. He was a cameraman on that. And he also, his proudest moment, I think he said, he was the second cameraman on the bear and dog fight in The Yearling, the Clarence Brown production. And then he also worked on The Fool Killer with Anthony Perkins. And all the while, even though he wasn't strictly employed by TVA anymore, he continued to make films for them and Oak Ridge. So that provided a good income. And it's also helpful to us today because these were federally funded films. They're open and available to the public. A lot of his work is online through NARA and through, I believe, Library of Congress website. And anybody can just throw them up on YouTube, I think, and not get in too much trouble. It seems people do that because it is like a sort of publicly owned good. So if you're interested in watching more of his films, just search him out on some of these government websites. But I wanted to show you another example of a film. This is a TVA film he worked on in 1958. And this is an example of what we saw, especially with this last one, how the quality of the film and transfers is not the best it could be. Here's a more recent transfer we can see what it potential.
In 1949, the hydroelectric potential of the river system was substantially developed, but demand for power continued to rise. In that year, Congress authorized the construction of a huge steam plant for generating electricity at Johnsonville, Tennessee. All the while, the use of electricity on farms, in homes, and in factories also soared, taxing existing facilities to provide power. After the first plant at Johnsonville came Widow's Creek, Shawnee, then Kingston, Colbert, John Sevier, and Gallatin. As fast as their generating units went into service, their output was absorbed. The plant at Kingston became the largest of any known steam electric plant in the world. It operates 24 hours every day. Its condensers use as much water as the entire city of New York. When operating at full capacity, this plant will consume 14,000 tons of coal a day. In the total valley economy, 7 out of 10 men residing in the area served by TVA now earn their living at non-agricultural jobs. Prior to 1933, nearly 6 out of 10 were working on farms. Yet on the farm, conditions continue to improve. Even with fewer farm hands, the farmers are producing more. Diversified agriculture, new methods, and electrification have let farm families share in the uptrend of the valley's economy. The valley and its people make a fair exchange. The horse-drawn era was traded in for the mechanical era. Old methods replaced by modern methods. Back-breaking man-hours replaced by kilowatt hours. Electricity today does the heavy work in homes and on farms, and at a price that encourages shortcuts in man-hours and better and higher production. The readiness with which Americans can adapt themselves to the conveniences of modern living is reflected in the boom in the appliance market. People in the valley use twice as much electricity per capita as the average in the nation. Every industrial state in the Union produces consumer goods for the Tennessee Valley. From Maine to California, from Washington to Florida, products are shipped in. The valley has established itself as a national crossroad of trade, a solid section of inter-regional commerce. Dairy products and meat, fertilizer and grain, tobacco, cotton, coal, paper, and petroleum produced and traded for the needs of the nation.
Okay, so the final clip we'll watch from one of his films is from The Sixth Will. This was probably his most well-known or most well-distributed film. It's a driver's education film, which I don't know, despite the wide range of age of people here, I think everybody's probably familiar with that, whether you sat through it in the classroom yourself or you've seen it referenced in shows. This was like a really popular genre of education classroom film. And Sam's was pretty unique because it's a rare one where it doesn't actually show a wreck. It's showing how to avoid them. And it had a life beyond just when it was made, which was 1961. First of all, there were at least, I believe, 250, probably more like 300 prints sent around the country. So it had a pretty wide distribution around the nation. And it got uploaded online at some point, and so had a second life with people discovering it. People like driver's education film. They tend to have this kind of, I don't know, it's an amusing quality. Even though the intentions, of course, were to sort of educate, inform, and perhaps frighten people into driving and being a certain way, they, amongst all the education films, seem to have a second life, and The Sixth Will is one that does too. You see there it got a special award of merit, and there's the production notes from it. And I'd also note that Sam's daughter Alice is featured in this. So we're going to watch, this is again about a 25-minute, and we're going to watch about a 9-minute segment of it.
There are 5 wheels on every car. 4 have tires on them. The 5th is used for steering. But behind the 5th is the thing which gives the auto its life, its heart, its brain, its conscience. The most important, the biggest wheel in the car is the 6th wheel, the driver. It's one thing to pass a driver's test. It's another to pass the test of everyday driving. This is the story of a day in the lives of 3 typical drivers. They may remind you of someone, a friend, a neighbor, a relative, yourself. When they slip into that all-important seat, they assume a new role and a major responsibility to their community, their fellow drivers, their family. How well they get through their day behind the wheel depends on how well they understand their automobile. Mary now, on the way to her first stop. Her driving attitude and posture leave much to be desired, as does the discipline of those children. They give her and that car a hard time. What about servicing? How does Mary feel about that? She doesn't. That's up to Dad on the weekends. She just trusts that everything will work when she needs it. No seatbelts? She doesn't feel they need them. No speed demons in their family. And besides, they use the car mostly on short hauls. It would be more of a nuisance than a help, she thinks. What Mary doesn't know is that most accidents occur less than 25 miles from home and under 30 miles per hour. And with restless children in the car, well, there's another good reason for seatbelts, Mary. In most states, it's against the law to pass a stopping school bus. In any case, it makes good sense. Children aren't very predictable. Gary's on the way to his girl's house now. Kay'll be waiting for him along with another couple going to the game with them. Man, listen to that motor hum. That's because I treat this car like the best. He does. But no matter how he cleans his spark plugs, adjusts his timing, or tunes his carburetor, Gary never seems to get the gas mileage he expects. Watch him drive in traffic and you'll see why. And by the way, Gary, where's your seatbelt? Seatbelt? I guess I could use one. But heck, I'm still paying off my radio. That's no pro talking, Gary. Lou's nearing his first stop. It'll be a good day. He can feel it. But though he has some thoughts of business, most of his attention is focused on the road. Lou drives defensively. He looks and thinks ahead. You have the right of way, Lou. Wow, good thing you did slow down. I always give the other guy the benefit of the doubt. There's an awful lot of nuts on the road these days, and it doesn't pay to argue with them, at least not from behind the wheel. A pretty sane attitude. Time to catch the news. That's the best way. Eyes on the road.
Now that's the news for now. The next news in 1 hour. This has been Jim Rush.
Oh, well, better to miss the station than the road, huh, Lou? How is Mary doing? She hates Main Street at this hour. Seems like everyone in town has some place to go. And some of them don't seem to care how they get there. But Mary's used to that. Mary knows that wherever a ball rolls out, it's usually followed by its owner. An extra stop this morning. It'll only take a minute. Mother forgot something. Just in time. This time. There's no doubt about it, Mary. Children in cars can be a problem. Well, here's our boy again. A few more minutes and he'll be at Kay's house. When he's alone in the car, Gary's a pretty good driver. Notice the way he sits up, holds the wheel, looks ahead and concentrates. What's this? Some getaway, huh? Really? 0 to 30 in 3 seconds. And down again just as fast. That's where your gas goes, down the drain, Gary. Tires, too. Jackrabbiting is expensive and senseless. But how about that pickup? Save it for when you need it. Hey, what's this? Oh, Lou's been turned down on his first stop of the day. Too bad. Like most of us, Lou carries over some of his frustrations and hostility into his driving. Out of the way, stupid! Easy, Lou. It's not her fault you didn't get that order. Cute little thing, isn't she? Hi, honey. Oh, well, old Mannheim never bought much anyway. We'll make it up in Dodgetown. That's the spirit, Lou.
So I'm sure some of you recognize the downtown area there. That was not Knoxville, obviously, but Maryville. And some of the shops and buildings still there, some obviously long gone. But again, it illustrates just how this is a record of things that are no longer there, and some that remain. It's just a snapshot of what it looked like at the time this was made. So from 1958 to 1964, Sam Orleans worked on a series of films about the nuclear ship Savannah. This was the first commercial merchant nuclear-powered ship. They got him involved from the beginning of it to making the plans, blueprints, to the production of the ship and how it ran, to its maiden voyage, to its stops at various ports along the way, and even at the World's Fair in Seattle. And there were a series of those made where he traveled with the ship itself, of course, and the family went along with him. And Alice has good memories of traveling as a little girl shooting this. Unfortunately, he did not live to see the completion of the series because in 1964, July 9th, he perished in a plane crash, United Airlines Flight 823, returning from a work-related trip to New York. The airline went down in Cott County in a small community near Parrotsville, and it killed everybody aboard, 35 passengers and the 4 crew members. And Orleans was 65, and just a few months earlier, he had celebrated his 50th anniversary in the film industry. There were articles in the paper. He created a press release to send this out. And obviously, he was on the front page of the Sentinel there, so that gives you a sense of how well he was known and respected in the community. And then that was, the Sentinel had more detailed information inside about all the victims of the crash. And, you know, like the fate of most of the mid-century industrial films, they've got a limited shelf life because, you know, they fade over time. Newer ones are made to appeal to the newer audiences and newer viewers. His films sort of like were forgotten for a while. Some of the government ones, of course, were around, but there wasn't really a YouTube or online platforms to show these. So unless you're a Knoxvillian, and even then you might not have remembered some of this. But in 2005, the TAMAS co-founders, Bradley Reeves, found a number of Orleans films in the hands of a Knoxville film collector. And then he and Louisa Trott, who was also TAMAS co-founder, started down this journey of tracking them down. They found Orleans' daughter, Alice, and got in touch with her. And that became a collaboration where they were able to bring some of these films in for preservation, for transfers, and also a lot of the paperwork and documents related to that. So today, around 30 of the approximately estimated 100 films of the Samuel Orleans Studios produced between 1946 and 1964 survive. Some are turning up all the time. One did a few years ago. And in typical Bradley Reeves flair, he let me know just before this started that another one had turned up. What is the title? Skull Creek Way, which I think is a kiddie film, is a film sort of marketed for children's films. As I guess he's scanning it now, and we may be seeing that soon. But it's a really interesting legacy because so many of these were made, but not many of the prints survive in good condition. So archives like TAMAS and McClung Collection has a lot of the paperwork and documents. Hold on to those. Archives of Appalachia at ETSU also preserves some of these films. So, and of course we couldn't, you know, a lot of this information is provided by Sam's daughter, Alice. So we're very grateful for her, for the collaboration and the working with. That's how we sort of get to know these things so well. And a lot of people from around remember, does anybody remember seeing The Sixth Will, for instance? I've talked to some people who grew up in Knoxville who remember this being shown in the class. In 2006, Bradley and Louisa actually took today's news, Tomorrow's Men, to the Orphans Film Symposium, and that got a little bit of a wider audience too. They published an article about him in the Association of Moving Image Association magazine. So his name is known, and he's getting sort of more well-known and remembered, and we're grateful to be a part of that and glad we can preserve part of his legacy here. And look forward to opportunities to preserve the legacy even further. So that's it. I do want to thank, of course, Bradley and Louisa for bringing this in. Steve Cottam, who provided a home for the published materials and paper materials at McClung, Archives of Appalachia, and of course, Alice Orleans Jordan, who's been so helpful in providing this. Any questions?
Yeah, anything from that Knoxville Sentinel clip that any famous editors like Rule or anybody in that?
I've not identified, and I'm not sure who. I mean, famous editors, you mean famous locally or beyond?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It would have been 1946, so you can check the local newspapers or the Sentinel rather and see who that is.
And where was that located?
The New Sentinel?
Sentinel.
It was right down there. What's the hotel that's there now? Courtyard Hotel. Thank you. And also I should take an opportunity to mention, I don't know if there's any in the gift shop, but Paul James is here, the Knoxville History Project. I wrote an article about Sam Orleans for their most recent Knoxville Lives publication. So if you want to learn more and see some more photographs, you can look there. And my thanks to Paul and Jack Neely, who wrote about Sam. He was probably one of the first ones for years who did when Bradley and Louisa rediscovered this stuff.
So you mentioned that there's like 30 out of 100 films that's like are known to be surviving. Is there like a full filmography of Sam Orleans that's known? Like, did you compile it, or was it published like through his own marketing?
Yeah, so that survives in bits and pieces through his own. He has his own list. But then someone contacted Tamas, I forget how many years ago, she was working on a complete filmography. She was trying to track everything down. Not heard a follow-up or know where that's published, but you know, obviously from his papers and then the records in National Archives and other places, it's sort of been cobbled together from that. And I don't know if this one Skull Creek Way that Bradley is talking about had been known about before or was on any list. You had a question?
After the plane crash and his death, that his company continued production and continue on with others running it, or?
Yeah, he had a partnership. So there were other people invested in the company, and they did continue on for a while. But then there was sort of like a slow dissolution of it. And somebody back here have a question? You do.
Meaningless question, but that picture of his studio or his office, what street was that on? It was so steep.
Right, it was on 211 West Cumberland. It's where the Cook Loft is now, and people coming off of I-40 have to go up that hill there, and it is a steep level there. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed.